The sea was quiet that night, as if holding its breath. Far off the Brazilian coast, a group of sailors spotted something strange in the mist, a faint glow, flickering like a lantern lost at sea. But it didn't move with the waves. It burned steady, deep within a wall of fog that seemed to rise straight from the water. They marked the coordinates, certain they had found an island no map had ever shown. Yet when they returned at dawn, the light was gone, and so was the fog. Only stillness remained, thick and heavy as sleep. Months later, a government survey team set out to investigate. Their compass needles spun in circles as they neared the site. Birds avoided the air above it, turning sharply in flight as if something repelled them. When the fog finally parted, they saw it a stretch of mangrove forest, roots coiled like veins around the shoreline, and in the center stood a mansion. Its walls were made of pale stone, clearly imported, weathered by salt but unbroken by time. The building looked older than the island itself, like it had been waiting there long before anyone arrived to see it. The men approached carefully. No sounds came from the house, no smoke from its chimneys, no footprints on the sand, yet every window was shut tight, as though someone had sealed the life inside. One man knocked on the door, and the echo that answered was hollow, endless. They found signs of habitation, worn boots by the steps, a candle half melted on the sill, but no people, no animals, only the smell of damp stone, and something faintly sweet, like flowers left too long in the dark. When they returned to the mainland, their report was brief. They called it Ilha Caetano, after the family whose name they found carved above the door. The Caetanos were known once, years ago, on the coast of Bahia, a family of traders who had vanished from society without a trace. Some said they had fled scandal, others that they had discovered something that made them richer than kings. But no one ever confirmed where their wealth came from, or why they chose to live so far from the world. In the small towns along the coast, people began to whisper again. They said the family had been seen walking at dusk, their faces pale, their clothes outdated. Fishermen swore they heard laughter from the waves on windless nights, and sometimes when the tide was low, the faint scent of burning candles drifted from the sea. No one could say for certain who lived in that house, or if anyone ever truly did, but the lights still returned from time to time, quiet, steady, floating just above the water, guiding those who saw them toward a place that was never meant to be found. The Caetano mansion stood like a wound on the island, beautiful and wrong all at once. Its walls shimmered faintly in the damp air, carved with symbols no one recognized. The front doors opened inward, as though the house itself were breathing in whoever dared to enter. Inside, the silence was alive. Every footstep carried too far, echoing down corridors that twisted and turned until they ended in solid walls. Some doors opened to staircases that led nowhere, steps rising into ceilings or descending into darkness. Others revealed mirrors, hundreds of them, lining narrow halls like watchful eyes. When an architect named Paulo Neves was hired in 1936 to assess the structure, he arrived expecting a wealthy eccentric's retreat. What he found instead made him question the very idea of design. In his journal, later discovered in the wreckage of his boat, he wrote that the house was not built for living. It was built for watching. Small openings hidden behind tapestries led into hollow walls, and from those hollows one could see into bedrooms, parlors, even the dining hall. The ceilings were mirrored, not for beauty, but for reflection of movement. He described it as a home that observed itself. The servants he spoke to refused to meet his eyes. One told him that every window was nailed shut, and curtains were never drawn back. Another whispered that the family gathered only at midnight, when the piano began to play by itself. The melody was always the same, slow, circular, unfinished. None of them knew where it came from. The instrument was locked in a room that no one could open. In the grand hall hung a series of portraits, each of the same woman. Her features changed slightly with every painting, different dresses, different years, but always the same eyes, pale and unblinking. Locals believed she was the matriarch, Ilha Caetano, who died decades before the mansion was built. Paulo noted that her face appeared in more portraits than the entire family combined, as if she were the only one meant to be remembered. When Paulo tried to leave, the servants warned him not to return after nightfall. They said the house shifted when the moon was high, that doors opened where none had been, and that sometimes they heard breathing from the walls. He laughed it off then, until he saw it himself, the subtle movement of a mirror's reflection, a shadow that didn't belong to him. He fled the island before dawn. His last entry read, "This house was not built to shelter life. It was built to contain something that must never leave." And yet, even as he sailed away, he swore he could still see the glow of candles from the upper floors, burning steadily against the mist. Ilha Caetano returned to the island in 1939, after years abroad. He was young, refined, and strangely calm, the kind of man who seemed to listen more than he spoke. Locals remembered how he arrived by steamer with a dozen followers dressed in black, each carrying crates marked with the family crest. Within weeks, the mansion came alive again. Lights burned through the night, and the faint sound of chanting drifted across the waves. Lucio called his companions the devout. He told them the world had lost its purity, that mankind had strayed too far from its own design. He claimed that the Caetano bloodline had been chosen to restore balance, to rebuild what others had corrupted. His words were soft, but they carried weight. Those who worked for him said that after a few weeks, the followers no longer spoke to anyone outside. They moved through the halls in silence, eyes down, as if they were all listening to the same voice that no one else could hear. In his diary, later recovered from a trunk buried in the cellar, Lucio wrote of returning to the original form, of cleansing the body and mind from modern influence. He believed that truth existed in isolation, that the island itself had been chosen because it sat between worlds, touched by sea and soil, but belonging to neither. To him, it was sacred ground, and the mansion a vessel through which eternity might be reached. The devout began building new structures on the island, small stone shrines, circular and windowless. When asked their purpose, Lucio said they were places for reflection, yet no one saw anyone emerge once the doors were sealed. Supplies continued to arrive by boat, but no merchants were ever paid directly. Instead, envelopes of gold coins appeared on the docks at dawn. Rumors spread that Lucio had forbidden mirrors in the living quarters, that he feared the reflection showed not the person, but what he called the remainder. Servants reported seeing him sit for hours in front of Helena's portrait, whispering as though in conversation. They said he called her the Origin. As months passed, letters from the island stopped altogether. When government officials tried to make contact, the signal failed each time their ship approached the fog line. It was as if the island itself repelled interference, or perhaps accepted only those it deemed pure enough to enter. The last message ever sent from Ilha Caetano came through a telegraph operator in Recife. It was a single phrase repeated 3 times, "The form is complete." By the summer of 1942, the sounds that once marked life on Ilha Caetano had faded. The kitchen fires burned out. The docks lay empty, and the gardens once tended daily were overrun by vines. The servants, nearly 20 of them, had vanished without a word. No ships departed. No messages were sent. The mansion simply went silent, as if it had swallowed them whole. The mainlanders assumed the family had dismissed their staff and withdrawn further into seclusion, but the shipping records told another story. Crates of supplies kept arriving, flour, candles, medical tools, but no one came to collect them. Decades later, investigators combing through abandoned archives found a single surviving relic from that time, a maid's journal wrapped in cloth, buried in a broken chest near the estate's foundations. Her name was Anna. Her writing began plainly, describing long work days and strict rules. No talking after dark. No questions during meals. Then, slowly, her words began to tremble. She wrote of ceremonies that began after midnight, when the family and their followers gathered in the hall, the air heavy with incense and sea salt. She described guests who came by boat, but did not leave as they arrived. She said the faces of these guests were pale, distant, as though they were already fading. After each gathering, one servant would be missing, and no one spoke of them again. She wrote that sometimes before dawn she could hear the walls breathing, soft, slow, like something inside the house was alive and restless. When a massive storm struck the island in 1957, waves tore into the cliffs beneath the mansion, exposing the earth below. Villagers who later reached the site found dozens of unmarked graves, the soil mixed with shattered stone and bone. Some of the skeletons were small, delicate, their hands bound with twine. Others were buried standing upright, facing the sea. There were no markers, no prayers, no signs of mercy. The government declared the island unsafe for habitation, calling it cursed land. But for the families of those who had served the Caetanos, the word curse was not enough. They said the family's pursuit of purity had consumed itself, that Lucio had turned inward, feeding his faith with the lives of those who no longer fit his design. Ernesto's journal ended abruptly with a final note, scrawled in uneven ink. The light beneath the floors has started again. They say it means the origin is waking. I do not wish to see her face. No one ever discovered what happened to Anna. Only her words remained fragile and water-stained, whispering the truth that no one wished to believe, that the Caetano mansion was never abandoned. It was simply full. The storm that struck Ilha Caetano in 1971 revealed more than broken stone and buried bones. Beneath what was once the drawing room, a salvage crew found a rusted metal safe, half submerged in mud. Inside were 6 16mm film canisters wrapped in oilcloth. The reels were brittle, their labels faded to ghostly smudges, but someone had carved a single word into the metal: witness. When the footage was first played at the Coastal Archive in Salvador, the lights in the screening room were dimmed, and even the projector's hum felt uneasy. The first reel opened on the interior of the Caetano mansion. Dust floated through candlelight, and a slow rhythmic humming filled the air. A line of children, 5 or 6, dressed in pale linen, moved in a slow circle. Their faces were painted white, their eyes dark and wide. At first, the film seemed damaged, skipping frames, bending light in unnatural ways. But as it played, the distortions began to pulse with the music, as if the reel itself was breathing in time with the voices. The second reel showed the dining hall. The table was set with polished silver, yet the plates were empty. The camera panned slowly, shakily, past rows of seated figures. Some turned to look directly at the lens, though their expressions never changed. Others simply stared at nothing at all, as though waiting for something to begin. Then came a reel with no sound, only flickering images of corridors, mirrors, and doors that opened to black. When experts later studied the recordings, they discovered faint sounds hidden in the static, patterns resembling whispered words, though no language could be identified. Audio technicians reported headaches, dizziness, and a sensation of being watched. One restorer described feeling a presence behind the film, something pressing through the grain. The final reel was the most disturbing. It showed a man believed to be Lucio Caetano, standing in the grand hall surrounded by candles. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow but aware. He raised his hand, motioning for silence, then stepped closer to the camera. His mouth moved, forming words the microphone failed to catch. Yet every viewer agreed they could feel what he said, not hear it, something heavy that sat inside the chest. The reel ended abruptly in static, but for a moment before it cut out, Lucio's face flickered as though reflected in water, and behind him, shapes moved in the dark. Those who restored the footage refused to screen it again. They said the images lingered long after the lights came on, and that sometimes, if you listen closely enough, the projector still hums on its own. In 1993, a small television crew from Rio de Janeiro set sail toward Ilha Caetano. Their project was meant to be simple, a one-hour documentary on forgotten cults of South America. They carried cameras, lights, and sound recorders, along with the confidence of people who believed that history, no matter how strange, could be tamed by film. The last transmission they sent to the mainland came just before midnight, a calm voice saying they had reached the island and were setting up camp near the ruins. After that, the signal dissolved into static, followed by the low hiss of ocean wind. 2 days later, fishermen spotted their boat, drifting along the current, empty. Inside were their belongings, clothes, notes, food, even unspent film. The radio was still on, transmitting faint murmurs that no one could decipher. When played back, the sound seemed layered, like many voices speaking at once from a great distance. A rescue team was sent to the island. They found the cameras scattered in the sand, their lenses cracked, their batteries drained, though they'd been freshly charged. The tents were torn but not looted. It looked less like a struggle and more like a disappearance. The first recovered tape began normally, shots of the coastline, the mansion ruins, the sound of waves. The crew joked, laughed softly, their voices clear. Then the light dimmed too quickly for sunset, and the tone changed. The camera trembled as the operator whispered that the air felt heavier, the smell of salt giving way to something metallic, like blood or rust. One of them claimed to see figures in the distance, moving through the mangroves, though the footage shows only shifting shadows. Another tape captured what sounded like chanting, faint but rhythmic, echoing from beneath the ground. The crew followed the sound to the mansion's lower levels, where they found the remnants of a staircase descending into black water. Someone whispered, "It's still breathing down there." A few moments later, the picture cut out, replaced by static. When authorities reviewed the final recordings, they noticed something strange. Between frames, shapes flickered, faces, maybe, or impressions of light, appearing for less than a second each time. The experts who analyzed the audio said the murmuring voices continued to shift pitch, syncing perfectly with the crew's own breathing patterns, as if mimicking them. The investigation was eventually closed, the official report citing accidental drowning. But those who handled the footage swore the crew didn't drown. They believed the island absorbed them, just as it had taken everyone before. And sometimes, late at night, when the archived tapes are played for testing, a new voice joins the static, soft, exhausted, whispering a single word, "Return." Today, Ilha Caetano is a forbidden place. No ships sail near it, no tourists dare approach. The government lists it as an ecological hazard, its soil deemed unstable after decades of erosion. But satellite images tell a different story. Beneath the overgrowth, faint lines shape the earth, circles within circles, spirals that connect, like veins under skin. Experts call them patterns of collapse, yet they form too precisely, too deliberately, like the blueprint of something still living below the surface. Locals along the coast say that on calm nights, when the tide is low and the air stands still, the island hums. It's not a sound carried by wind, but one that trembles through the water itself. Some fishermen compare it to a heartbeat, slow, deep, patient. They say if you listen too long, it begins to sync with your own. And those who have heard it more than once often leave their nets untouched afterward, staring toward the fog as though waiting for something to rise. Over the years, countless expeditions have been proposed, each abandoned before departure. Maps are mysteriously misplaced, funding withdrawn, weather turning violent at the last moment. The few drones sent over the island return with corrupted data, images overexposed, sound recordings, filled with what technicians describe as breathing layered with whispers. One transmission, recovered for only a second, before the feed went dead, captured the faint outline of the mansion's foundations. Light moved across it, soft, flickering, almost like candles behind a wall of mist. Some believe the Caetanos never truly died. That their doctrine of purity, their obsession with isolation, was not a descent into madness, but a transformation, an attempt to become something beyond human, bound to the island's pulse. In old letters found in coastal archives, one servant wrote that Lucio believed the sea itself was alive, that it could listen and remember. He said the island was a threshold between spirit and flesh, and that the family's purpose was to keep that doorway open, no matter the cost. Now, even without people, Ilha Caetano endures as if it remembers. Its trees bend toward the sea. Its soil shifts in patterns unseen anywhere else. Perhaps the Caetanos achieved what they sought, an eternal communion, not through faith or blood, but through the land itself. And sometimes when the fog rolls in, and the water glows faintly beneath the moon, sailors still glimpse a light where no land should be, a steady flame above the waves, whispering its invitation to return to the island that was never meant to exist.